June 2nd, 1965. Michael, Buzz, and Neil return to the Earth, heroes of not just the United States, but of our humble planet. Conquerors of Luna, the first Kerbals to set foot on the moon and return safely to the Earth. A major contract completed, and the race to the moon victorious. If you've seen the live stream where we performed the mission in its entirety, then you know it wasn't entirely a smooth ride. We detached the forward heat shield and docking adapter on accident in lunar orbit. We landed the lunar excursion module with less than a second to spare. Quite literally 1 meters per second of delta V was left in the descent stage. And this goes along well with our apparent motto in this instance. We paid for a full tank of gas, dang nabbit, we're gonna use a full tank of gas. Ascending back to lunar orbit, we performed a thankfully uneventful hop from the LEM hatch door to the command module hatch door, as docking was no longer possible with the hardware gone. And thanks to the help from an astral janitor overhearing stressful conversations planning the smoothest possible entry interface, the capsule's parachutes did not burn off during re-entry, and all was well. There is another dynamic to this entire flight not as obvious, and that was the fact that this mission went all in. As our 3 brave Kerbonauts entered lunar space, the entire program went bankrupt. Funds more and more in the red as the mission progressed, reaching negative 6,000 funds as the crew re-entered Earth's atmosphere. Of course, a successful contract brought us right back, but if this mission failed, we not only lost the race to the moon, but our entire program might have gone under. All in all, it was a good race. We really put the pedal to the metal at the end there, and I think we're lucky nothing worse happened. But as one race ends, another begins, as whispers of lunar stations, surface outposts, and other planets can be heard through the halls of mission control. Let's continue our story, shall we? Welcome back to For All Kerbalkind. June 3rd, 1965. The sun sets on Brownsville, Texas, the day after Trinity 3's return. In the vehicle assembly building, 2 more Cattern 5 rockets have begun construction and assembly with the program's newly secured funding. Jim and Scott Kerman sit aboard Gemini 9, patiently waiting their turn to soar into the night sky. Their mission tonight is to board the K4 research station for a would-be record-breaking 90-day stay in Earth orbit. This journey begins with a ride on top of the Chiton 3 rocket, and a sound that never gets old. Chiton's second stage shuts down, and Gemini 9 detaches from its ride. Jim and Scott are just shy of orbit, with an apogee of 341 kilometers and a perigee of 103. Current distance to target, just over 2,000 kilometers. It will take a handful of short maneuvers over the next day or so to approach a rendezvous with their new home, but 34 hours after lifting off, the orbital outpost comes into view. Moments after sunrise, on the second day of their 3-month mission, Jim and Scott slide into the K4's DMs with ease, happy to be its 6th and 7th visitor. All systems are checked out and good to go. Plenty of supplies to last, including champagne to celebrate our successful lunar landing mere days ago. The crew of 2 have had no time for festivities down on the ground due to time constraints and training, but here in 0G, floating 300 kilometers above the Earth, Jim and Scott truly do feel on top of the world. And they'll have seemingly all the time in the world to soak in this feeling as well. Outside, the station uses its thrusters to orient itself with the horizon, the negative 28-degree roll aligning its solar panels with the solar light. Despite the now 39% degradation of its 2 solar panels, there's more than enough power still coming in to charge everything back up every sunrise. Now, we'll check in with these 2 later on. For now, their long mission is a go. June 25th, 1965. A surprise to some at the Foundation, the hammer and sickle, flag of the Soviet Union, sits defiantly on the surface of the moon. A single Soviet Kerbal salutes a grainy black and white camera for the entire world to see. For less than a month, the moon remained fully blue, and now it sits both red and blue. Given the vastly more impressive launch cadence and infrastructural capability of our adversary in this race, them sitting in second place to the moon is clearly not a hindrance in any way moving forward. There's always going to be another race. After all, it seems this was far from a finish line, but rather the first major milestone along our way. We may have won the sprint to the moon, but in the end it matters little, as there is still much more work to be done. August 7th, 1965. Christmas last year saw the liftoff of Markiner 4, a probe designed to explore Mars and its moons. Now over 7 months later, the time has finally come. One simple corrective maneuver of 15 meters per second radial in is all that's needed to bring Markiner's attached lander to its desired perihelion of 25 kilometers. Using a reaction wheel to apply torque to the craft allows us to adjust its attitude for solar panel alignment or course corrections without altering the trajectory in any way. This is perfect for interplanetary plotting, where at times even the slightest adjustment has huge implications later on. Drifting closer and closer, batteries mostly recharged from interplanetary science gathering, the small lander hiding inside its entry aeroshell is detached. In 5 hours, it will be engulfed in plasma, screaming towards the barren surface of another world. For now, though, we have to ensure Markiner 4 captures into orbit of Mars before we swap back to the lander for its 7 minutes of terror. Burning its engine in a retro but slightly radial out attitude will bring the Apoarion inside of Mars' sphere of influence, but we'll have to be quick about it. Only minutes remain before the atmosphere begins to influence our small lander a bit too much. And captured. Markiner 4 hurries to align its solar panels once more and shuts down all unnecessary systems. It's time to hurl ourselves into the Martian atmosphere for the first time. RCS thrusters fire on the lander's aeroshell to minimize heating on sensitive hardware. The heat shield will do its job protecting us, so long as we can maintain a retrograde attitude for the plunge. It shouldn't be a problem, so long as we don't encounter any debris from the spacecraft separation 5 hours previously. Speaking of, it seems the stack separator responsible for detaching us from Markiner 4 has decided that it will stick around a little bit longer. Off to the side. The aeroshell begins to lean to the opposite side as Martian air shoves the piece of debris into the heat shield, causing instability. The RCS thrusters do the best they can to keep the craft from flipping sideways, but fire and plasma rapidly build up and something starts to melt. Luckily for us, it was the debris. No longer hindered, now encapsulated in atmospheric entry particles, we simply wait and hope we slow down enough to deploy the parachutes before crashing into the surface. Plasma subsides, and the aeroshell begins to cool down as our speed and altitude rapidly descend. 8 kilometers from the surface, still falling at over 100 meters per second, 1,500 meters per second across, the aeroshell deploys. Or at least it's meant to. One half falls away without any issue, the other pinned or pinched on something, refusing to fall away. This doesn't seem like much of an issue, to be honest. That is, until it's time to deploy the parachute. A rather large parachute, I might add. One that easily produces 15 plus Gs to slow us down in a matter of moments. At this particular moment, the remaining aeroshell half smacks into 2 of our 4 main solar panels. This becomes painfully evident as telemetry suggests only 2 of the panels deploy. From tension to relief, back to tension. The probe is safe. Its dangerous ordeal is over, but unfortunately, it won't be smooth sailing. Once on the ground, 2 of the 4 panels won't provide enough power to keep its systems alive for very long. And by the time Markiner 4 comes around again on the tail end of its first orbit, there likely won't be much juice to transmit any data whatsoever. What's more, the asymmetrical nature of this anomaly may prove to bring about an unfavorable landing situation, as these solar panels also happen to be our landing legs. Markiner 4 is currently our only means of communicating with Earth, and unfortunately, the Martian surface will occlude direct communications before the lander touches down. As such, should communication never be restored, we won't know if the cause would be a dead battery, a botched landing, or both. For now, this is very likely the last we will ever hear from the probe, beeping farewell to its creators as it floats to the surface of its new home, a barren wasteland with no friends to talk to, nor any form of travel whatsoever. Kind of a rough life, huh? Well, they might not get to see what happens here, but we sure do. Thanks to the technology of this being a video game and not real life, the lander touches down, and yeah, less than ideal. If we would have had enough battery life to communicate anyway, this would just be the worst luck. Our lander is stuck in the sands of Mars, rear end stuck proudly in the sky, mooning the Earth with all of its might, for us having the nerve to send it here like this. I suppose that's a fitting end to its journey, despite a failed landing. Just the thought of astronauts visiting one day to find out whatever happened to it anyway, finding it this way, will be comical, to say the least. August 15th, 1965. Back on planet Earth, all reports indicate the successful launch of another Soviet N-1 rocket, very likely to be a second crewed mission to the moon. The United States would have loved for a dinosaur reconnaissance flight to have documented the liftoff from just above the upper atmosphere. But the KX-2003 will still be performing final rollout, checkout, and flight readiness procedures for the next 24 hours. And that vehicle will be on standby for a future liftoff, that means. Meanwhile, 5 days from now, much to the dismay of the United States, a second Soviet flag is planted on the moon, mere hundreds of meters from a piece of American historical significance, the Mayflower lander. That probe was launched in November of 1961 and was the very first Kerbal-made object to successfully land on the lunar surface. And some feel proud that the Soviet Union would feel the desire to inspect such a piece of history, and others feel disrespected. Either way, this being a more notable fact of the mission, the first female Kerbal successfully returns to the Earth from the lunar surface days later. A great accomplishment for all of Kerbalkind. Moving back to Mars, Markiner 4's mission is far from complete. It intends to explore the 2 Martian moons of Phobos and Deimos. Its current highly eccentric orbit is perfect to perform flybys of either moon practically at will. With an apoarion of 190 million meters from Mars, the smallest of course corrections drastically alters where Markiner will be passing through the possible trajectories of the 2 moons. So first up, rounding out Markiner 4's first orbit of Mars, is a flyby of Phobos. Drifting towards one another at breakneck speeds, a potato-shaped celestial rock becomes larger and larger, from a speck of dust to larger than life in mere minutes. Infrared radiometry, visual imaging, and radiation detection information all trickles back to astral scientists on Earth, eager to learn all there is to know about these small worlds that have been floating here in the black for eons. But just as soon as data began to come in, it ceases. No, not because of an impact or anything. I'm being careful, I promise. But due to our relative speed, not much data can be collected on a single pass alone. We're gonna have to fly past these moons hundreds of times to collect all the potential science we can gather. Either that, or try something a little more daring. But more on that later on. Our first flyby of Mars' second moon, Deimos, will occur in roughly 20 days' time. 2 minutes come and go, along with our first flyby of Deimos, much the same as before, this time slightly further away from Mars itself. Future flybys are absolutely possible, but what lies ahead for Markiner 4 may be more interesting than that. For now, the orbiter burns roughly 10 meters per second at Apoarion to make sure its trajectory does not intersect Phobos or Deimos while we aren't there to watch it, as we have 2 Kerbals that are very eager to return back home. But first, on August 28, 1965, the Commonwealth Space Commission, now with 2 Caliban satellites in Earth orbit and ride shares into low Earth orbit with Soviet cooperation, have one-upped themselves on their journey towards becoming a third power in the realm of space. A lunar impactor strikes the surface of the moon just west of the Oceanus Procellarum. We wish the best of luck on all future endeavors, though some feel a bit uneasy regarding said cooperation flights with the Soviet Union. Is this a sign of greater adversaries to the United States in the future? Or is communist Commonwealth cooperation a step in the direction of ending the Cold War? September 17th, 1965. Jim and Scott Kerman have long since passed their targeted 90-day stay in orbit, though a good chunk of supplies still remain usable on board, and the crew, with permission from Mission Control on the ground, decide to stick it out for as long as possible. After 106 days in orbit of the Earth, stress levels reaching dangerous percentages, and still 30-odd days worth of supply left on the K4 station, Gemini 9 finally departs, following a quick EVA necessary to transfer between the 2 spacecraft. Now, they could have stayed longer, but Mission Control needs their teams focusing on other missions soon to be at hand. Retro motors fire on time, and Gemini 9 makes its way down from 300 kilometers to Earth interface, aiming for a simple splashdown in the Gulf of Mexico. September 19th, 1965. Intel suggests the Soviet Union is planning to launch something into low Earth orbit tomorrow, doing so with quite a large and capable launch vehicle as well, all of which lights up warning lights in the heads of many. Weapon platform, nuclear power, and threat to national security, among other things, are discussed as possibilities for the launch. Either way, the US is pleased to utilize its Dinosaur spacecraft that has been patiently standing by. In reality, we believe the launch to be a space station similar to that of the K4, but photographs of the launch facility before, during, or after liftoff could provide us with useful insights. And so, as the sun continues to rise above Texas, the twin boosters of the Chiton 3C ignite, and Alan Kerman lifts off of the launch pad. Boosters separate right on time, and much to the relief of Alan, who has experienced otherwise, the sustainer engine of Chiton 3 has ignited successfully. The ride up has gone smooth so far. That is until second stage separation. The hot stage of Chiton 3 occurred seconds too early, causing substantial damage to the first stage before a timed separation. The rocket peels away from a massive explosion of Stage 1 that very luckily seems to have caused no problems for the flight. Everything is rapidly checked out and verified, but it seems the Dinosaur flight remains go for orbit. And Stage 3 cutoff. Alan is in orbit, 161 kilometers by 156, low and close to the atmosphere for a re-entry in a couple of days at tops. The launch has placed Dyna into a 50 degrees inclined orbit in order to reach directly above the Soviet launch facility in Baikonur. Mission Control has opted for an orbit which hangs above their facility in the middle of the night, the assumption being, if it truly is a weapons platform or any sort of top-secret military operation, a night launch is quite probable, and as such, activity on the ground would be high. Hopefully, for photography's sake, key pieces of infrastructure or hardware would be lit up for us to see as well. We don't exactly have night vision capabilities with our current payload, but we'll hopefully be able to see something. And if we don't, it's proof that we likely have no need to worry. The sun sets on the first of roughly a dozen orbits that Dinosaur will be operating. The cargo bay is opened, and the observation equipment is tested, checked out, and activated. Now begins many hours of quiet concentration for Ellen, lurking silently in orbit above as the Soviet Union sleeps below. Mission Control has instated radio silence on the flight as a measure to minimize Soviet knowledge of our activities. They likely wouldn't be too keen for us to be spying on them, especially after the embarrassing compromise of the Discoverer program. But as such, Alan will not be able to communicate back home what he sees until he returns with photographic evidence intact. Down below, the facility at Baikonur sees little activity that would suggest a military operation. Minimal lighting, not many vehicles operating, a rather large rocket with idle activity on the launch pad, but nothing suggesting the use of dangerous material or weaponry. Of course, much of this cannot be truly confirmed from orbit, especially at night. But nothing is raising any red flags from what Alan can see from his single pass over the facility. In addition to its primary purpose, this mission is also largely a test flight for the new hardware and re-entry situations. Back down on Earth, the Foundation is hard at work calculating where exactly the re-entry burn should take place to bring Alan back to the runway in Brownsville, Texas. Alan could stay up in orbit to photograph the facility after a potential liftoff, but the US wants the intelligence acquired from the mission as soon as possible, in case of any preventative measures needing to be performed. And so, after just shy of 24 hours in orbit, the sun sets below the horizon for the final time, and Dynaspy burns for home. The resulting re-entry trajectory will be a major milestone for the KX-20 program, demonstrating its capability to bank to the side and reach landing zones not otherwise possible if a capsule were utilized on the same path. For this particular flight, a bank 10 degrees to the right for the majority of re-entry is needed, of course targeting Brownsville, Texas, which is just seeing the first light of morning as we silently enter the atmosphere. As our speed becomes slower and the atmosphere becomes more dense, we are able to utilize far more bank than we were before. This particular re-entry appears to be a bit too far towards the east and will likely be an overshoot into the Gulf as well. So, a more aggressive turn to the right will attempt to remedy both problems. What we can do about the situation at this point is limited, but if we're lucky, it might just be enough. Just off the right wing, Alan spots the Gulf Coast off of Texas as he banks 60 degrees right to bleed speed. We were right about it being an overshoot, alright. This craft could have easily gone for miles and miles out into the Gulf of Mexico if we weren't careful. But also below, Alan spots something far more exciting. The launch facility he took off from yesterday. The banking has worked. We made it all the way back home. The problem that now remains is our current velocity. Alan is still screaming through the atmosphere at Mach 6 and falling, and that speed can only be bled off by more banking. One long sweep to the right around Bronzeville will slow us down for final approach. But as we descend into the atmosphere, high angle of attack banking becomes more and more unstable, and Alan decides to shallow out his turn ever so slightly, doing his best to pull the craft around and maintain enough speed to glide towards the runway. Unfortunately, it becomes clear that too much speed was lost, and we'll have to touch down just outside of Brownsville, Texas, still only a mere 30 kilometers from the Space Center. In a matter of hours, the Soviet Union launches a UR-500 Yakor rocket. On board, a spacecraft known as Salyut-1, a small space station much like our own K4 research outpost. Intel suggests Soyuz 8 is readying for a month-long stay in orbit. Certain its power supply would not be able to sustain much longer than that. But regardless, we are no longer the only ones preparing for a long-duration stay in space. Even more evidence that the race is far from over. We now live in a time where Kerbalkind has stepped foot on the surface of the moon. And soon, I'm sure we'll be exploring other celestials in no time. For us, we have plenty of money to decide what to spend on. Markiner 4's final leg of its mission is coming up, some satellites are ready to launch from Wallops, Virginia, and there's plenty more missions to construct. But that's going to be all for this episode. Thank you so much to Emantic, Darth Malachor, Day Kraybon, Mr. Bluestar, Caden Seward, Elliot Ewing, Guy Called Odin, and everyone else for your support on Patreon. And thank you all so much for watching, and peace out.